My name is Captain Elise Ward. I am 32 years old and an Army intelligence officer stationed at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. After 10 years in uniform, after deployments to Germany and Kuwait, after every sleepless night of proving that discipline could rebuild what chaos once destroyed, I was finally days away from my promotion ceremony. The gold bars of a captain were waiting for me. I had imagined that day 100 times. The salute, the quiet pride, the sense that everything I had fought for was finally visible. That morning in May, 2024, I believed I had reached peace. I was wrong. The house in Fayetteville was not mine. It was my mother's, a neat white one-story with a porch swing and the constant smell of coffee and tension. I had flown in 3 days earlier only because she insisted. She said my stepfather Gerald wanted to celebrate my promotion early. I told myself I could handle a weekend under his roof. A soldier should be able to face anything. The sun was coming through the blinds when I buttoned my pressed uniform shirt. My left wrist still ached from an old field injury, but I ignored it. The briefing at Fort Liberty was at 900 hours. I had my folder ready, my cap on the dresser, my mind clear. When I heard heels clicking down the hallway, I already knew the sound. Tiffany, my stepfather's daughter, 23, always moving like the house belonged to her. She entered without knocking sunglasses on, though the room was dim, a takeout cup in one hand, her phone in the other. "Morning," she said, stretching the word until it dripped with attitude. "I need a ride to the mall by noon." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. "I have a briefing downtown base at 9. Ask your father. He's busy," she said flat, like that ended the conversation. "You can take me first." I zipped my folder. "Tiffany, I can't." My uniform was already half on. She leaned on the doorframe, smirking. "You act like you're the president or something. It's just the Army. Just the Army." The words landed harder than she expected. Before I could reply, a deeper voice filled the hallway. Gerald. He had that command tone that once used to make me shrink. He walked in without invitation, broad shoulders, polo shirt tucked in like he was going to a meeting that only he understood. "What's this I'm hearing? You refusing to help your sister." "She's not my sister," I said quietly. "She's 23. She can drive." His eyebrows rose like I had insulted his rank. "In this house," he said, "you will show respect." I kept my voice calm. "Respect isn't the same as obedience." He laughed once sharp. "You think that uniform makes you special." I faced him fully. "It's not the uniform, it's the discipline." His smile disappeared. Tiffany folded her arms, watching like it was a show. Gerald stepped closer. Around him the air thickened the way it used to before a storm. "You've been gone too long, Elise. You forget who takes care of this family." I looked at my mother's framed photo on the wall. "You take care of them by choice, not by rank." The temperature in his eyes dropped. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Tiffany stopped moving. Then he said it soft but cruel. "You talk like you run the world." I adjusted my sleeve. "I don't run the world. I just answer to a higher code than yours." His jaw tightened. There it was, the invisible line I had just crossed. The one that meant the argument was no longer about a ride to the mall. It was about control. He took one step closer until his breath smelled like coffee and anger. "You will take her," he said. Or what I asked, steady refusing to back down. His stare flickered. I could see the disbelief that I was no longer the quiet girl he could intimidate. Tiffany looked between us, curious, waiting for the explosion. My voice stayed calm. "I have a briefing. I will leave in 5 minutes. If you need a driver, call 1. Gerald's hand twitched at his side, but he didn't move. My mother's footsteps echoed down the hall. "What is going on here?" she asked, already sounding tired. I turned to her. "Nothing. I'm leaving." Gerald turned toward her. "She's disrespecting this family." My mother sighed. "Elise, why do you always start trouble when you come home?" There it was. The same sentence she had used since I was 16. The sentence that turned every wound into my fault. I swallowed hard. "I'm not starting trouble. I'm trying to leave for work." Gerald's voice rose. "You will not walk out that door ignoring this family." His tone was louder now, heavy, filled with ownership. I picked up my cap and keys. I don't need permission to serve my country." The silence after that line felt heavy enough to crush the room. He stared at me as if he didn't recognize me. Tiffany's lips parted a hint of shock. My mother whispered my name, but didn't move. I walked toward the door, each step measured. The uniform made a faint sound with every motion, like fabric remembering its duty. My heart beat fast but steady. At the threshold, I looked back once, memorizing the faces that had spent years trying to keep me small. That morning, I truly believed I was walking out for a normal day. I didn't know that within 24 hours I would wake up under hospital lights, my arm in a cast, my life divided into before and after. I thought discipline would protect me. I was wrong. That morning, I didn't know I'd walk into the ER before ever stepping on the promotion stage. I joined the United States Army when I was 21 years old, 3 months after finishing college, and 10 weeks after my stepfather told me I was wasting my degree. At the time, I didn't know if I was running toward something or away from someone. Maybe both. The Army became the one place where effort meant results, where you could earn respect without begging for it. My first deployment was to Germany, where the air smelled like rain and diesel, and the nights were too quiet for a girl raised on Southern noise. Later in Kuwait, the sun burned everything raw, but the sense of purpose made it bearable. Each year, I built myself back from the fragments my home life had carved away. Rank by rank, report by report, I replaced fear with precision. That is what the promotion to captain meant to me. Not money, not title. It meant I had finally outrun the gravity of my past. I was days away from the ceremony when the call came from my mother. Her voice was sweet and trembling, the way she always sounded before asking for something. "Elise, honey, your stepfather wants to do something special for your promotion. Come home for a few days." I hesitated. The word home still meant caution, not comfort. But I told myself it was only a weekend. I could visit, smile, survive the dinners, and be back at base by Monday. Maybe it was even the adult thing to do. The Army teaches you to face the hardest terrain, and sometimes that terrain wears a family name. When I arrived, Gerald greeted me like a senator shaking hands at a press conference. He talked about how proud he was about his girl in the military. I nodded and kept my eyes polite. Tiffany was there too, scrolling her phone, pretending boredom. My mother fussed over the table setting like peace could be arranged between plates and napkins. During dinner, Gerald raised a glass of wine. "To discipline and honor," he said, and the way he said discipline made it sound like a word he owned. My mother smiled tightly. I felt the same cold pull I always felt in that house. When I left for the Army 10 years earlier, I promised myself I would never let their approval matter again. But sitting there hearing him toast values he didn't live, I realized how easily old habits tried to return. The next morning should have been normal. I had paperwork to finalize at Fort Liberty, a logistics briefing, and uniform fittings for the ceremony. I had already packed to leave early when my mother stopped me in the hallway. "Stay for one more day," she said. "Gerald wants to host a small dinner tonight. He invited some friends from the Chamber of Commerce. They'd love to meet you." I smiled the way soldiers do when a mission changes last minute. "I can't," I said gently. "The base expects me at 9. She sighed, that long, tired sound that always made me feel like a disappointment wrapped in metals. "Elise, you're always rushing back to that place. You never slow down for family." Family. The word felt like a leash. Still, guilt is a hard thing to unlearn. I said I would be back by evening. She looked relieved, not grateful. Later that day, as I drove to base, I kept thinking about the word promotion. In the Army, it meant recognition, leadership, and accountability. But in that house, promotion seemed to threaten Gerald. It reminded him that his control was fading. The more I achieved, the smaller his authority looked. For a man like him, that was unbearable. The Army had given me structure. He only understood dominance, and dominance has no use for mutual respect. When I returned that evening, the house lights were dim. Gerald was in his study door closed, his voice echoing through a phone call. Tiffany was stretched across the couch in silk pajamas, half watching a show, half watching me. "Back so soon, Captain," she said with a smirk. "Congratulations on being so important." I ignored the sarcasm. I had learned that not every battle deserved engagement. Still, something about her tone hinted at what was coming. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Gerald's planning a dinner for you tomorrow night," she said. "You'll be there." It wasn't a question. I looked at her tired eyes and wondered when she stopped asking and started obeying. Maybe she never stopped. Maybe she just transferred command. I told her I would think about it. Her expression stiffened. "You know how he gets when you defy him," she said softly. That was the warning. Not concern, just caution. Like she was reminding me of the weather forecast before a storm. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, uniform folded beside me, the air heavy with the smell of old carpet and control. 10 years in the Army had taught me how to lead missions, decode intelligence, and manage crises, but nothing had trained me to survive the quiet manipulation of home. I kept replaying the phone call that brought me here. "He wants to celebrate your promotion early." I realized then it wasn't a celebration. It was a test. He wanted proof that I was still under command. Maybe he wanted to remind me that, uniform or not, this house was still his ground. I glanced at my calendar on the phone. 3 days until the ceremony. 3 days until I could leave Fayetteville for good. I promised myself I would last 72 more hours without losing my composure. That promise lasted less than one. Sometimes you can sense when something is shifting beneath the surface, like ground softening before it breaks. That night when I passed Gerald's office, he lowered his voice on the phone. The only word I caught was control. It was enough. The next morning would prove that nothing in that house had changed except me. In the Army, we call that situational awareness. At home, it's called survival instinct. Would you have gone back home for a family celebration? Tell me where you're watching from. The next morning began with the quiet rhythm I had learned to love in the Army. Wake at 6, coffee black uniform, pressed checklist in my head before the sun had fully climbed. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning before my final meeting at Fort Liberty, the last step before my promotion ceremony. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing briefing notes when the sound of high heels echoed down the hallway. Tiffany appeared again, holding her phone like a mirror and a straw coffee cup in her other hand. She wore a pink hoodie that probably cost more than my month's rent when I was a second lieutenant. She stopped by the fridge, opened it, and sighed dramatically. The silence was deliberate. She wanted attention. I kept reading. Finally, she said, "I need you to take me to the Fayetteville Mall by noon." I looked up slowly. "For what?" She smiled. "Shopping." "The dinner is tomorrow and I have nothing to wear." "You have a car," I said. "Drive yourself." Her smile vanished as fast as it appeared. "I promised my friends I'd meet them there. They're helping me pick something out. You can drop me off." I turned a page in my folder. "Tiffany, I have a meeting at 900 hours. The base is 40 minutes away. I'll be gone most of the day." She blinked, confused, like she couldn't process the word no. "You're always about your Army stuff," she said. "Try being family for once." The words hit like a small, sharp slap. I closed my folder and looked at her. Being family doesn't mean being a chauffeur. It means respect both ways. She rolled her eyes, scoffed, and muttered something under her breath that I decided not to ask about. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everyone?" I answered evenly. "It makes me accountable, not better." She huffed and stormed toward the hallway. I should have let her go, but the years of training kept my voice steady and precise. "Tiffany, this isn't about your outfit. It's about priorities. You'll understand that one day." She spun back around. "You sound just like him," she said. That line stopped me. "Just like who?" She smiled thinly. "Dad." For a second, I saw what she was doing, drawing lines of loyalty, making it me against him as always. Before I could respond, his voice arrived from the doorway. "What's going on here?" Gerald's tone already carried accusation. Tiffany folded her arms. "She won't take me to the mall." He looked at me like I had committed treason. "Is that true?" I stood slowly, keeping my composure. "I have a meeting at the base this morning. She can drive herself." He walked into the kitchen, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. "I said she can drive herself." His jaw tightened. "You're under this roof, you'll do as asked." I glanced at my watch, calm. "Respectfully, sir, I take orders from my commanding officer. Not from whoever raises his voice loudest." His face turned red. My mother appeared in the doorway, eyes already weary. "Gerald, please," she said. He ignored her. "This is what happens when women start thinking they're in charge," he muttered. My mother flinched. Tiffany looked pleased. I could almost hear the echo of every past argument condensed into that moment. I felt my phone in my pocket and, out of instinct, more than intent, pressed record. It was an old habit from deployment briefings. Always document. Always have proof. I kept my voice measured. "Gerald, I'm not trying to argue. I just can't drive her today." He stepped closer, finger pointing toward me like a weapon. "You'll take her, or you can find another place to stay." That was the line he always used, as if shelter equaled ownership. My pulse rose, but my expression didn't change. I learned to read threats by posture, not words, and his posture said escalation. He wanted a reaction, something he could twist later. Tiffany's phone camera flickered, the lens glinting. I didn't know if she was recording or pretending to, but it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about a ride. It was about power, documented or not. I adjusted my collar and stepped back just enough to make space. "I have duties that don't include shopping trips." His laugh was low and sharp. "Duties? Listen to her. The soldier who thinks she's above family." My mother whispered Gerald stop, but it was more plea than command. He turned to her, eyes flashing. "She needs to learn who she's talking to." That's when I felt it, the same sinking chill I'd felt in interrogation rooms overseas right before someone made a mistake they couldn't undo. In training, they teach you to sense the change in the air before conflict. The subtle shift of temperature, the breath before motion. It was there in that kitchen. I straightened, my voice firm, but quiet. "I'm leaving for my meeting. Tiffany, call your friends. Gerald, I appreciate the hospitality, but I won't be spoken to like a recruit." I walked toward the door, expecting his anger to stay verbal. Instead, he barked, "Don't walk away from me!" I didn't turn around. The silence stretched thin. Then came the sound of a glass hitting the counter, too hard, a sharp crack, then another sound, his boots on tile coming closer. My hand gripped the phone tighter in my pocket, the red recording light still glowing. My mother's voice trembled. "Gerald, please." He stopped only when Tiffany gasped, not from fear, but from anticipation. I turned halfway, keeping my voice steady. "If you touch me, sir, I will report it as assault. Simple, clear, factual. No threat, just law." He froze, confused for half a second. I saw the realization cross his face. This wasn't the girl who used to flinch. This was a soldier with evidence. Tiffany muttered, "You're insane." Gerald lowered his hand, shaking with fury. He didn't know where to aim. The silence that followed was the loudest kind. I reached the doorway and paused long enough to look back. In my world, threats are logged, not feared. I had been trained to detect danger miles away, analyze it and neutralize it before it reached command. But that morning, I learned something new. You can spend a decade reading enemies abroad and still miss the one standing in your own kitchen. By the time the argument started again, the clock on the wall read 8 to 12 a.m. I had already grabbed my cap, my folder, and the confidence that came with leaving. But in that house, leaving was never simple. Tiffany stood by the front door, scrolling her phone, still in her slippers, pretending to wait for a ride that didn't exist. I said quietly, "Tiffany, take your car." "You're 23. Her head lifted slowly like she was being dared. "Dad said you'd take me. He said you owe the family that much." I turned toward her, one hand on my folder, one on my keys. "I owe no one in this house anything except civility. You have a car. Drive yourself." She smirked, a small spark of mockery. "Maybe you should stop pretending the army makes you important." That sentence hung in the air long enough for Gerald to hear it from the next room. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, the kind that filled space before words did. He appeared in the hallway, his shoulders squared, eyes already burning. "What's this now? You refusing again?" He looked at Tiffany. "Go upstairs." She smiled triumphant and didn't move. I stayed where I was, calm but firm. "Gerald, I have to be on base by 9. I don't have time for another argument." He took a step forward. "You'll do what you're told in this house." I met his stare. "Sir, I take orders, but not yours. The silence afterward felt electric. My mother's voice floated weakly from the kitchen. Gerald, please. But the tone wasn't command. It was permission. He moved closer, close enough for me to see the twitch in his jaw. I could smell the bitter coffee on his breath, the anger rising behind his eyes. You think you can walk in here with that uniform and talk down to me, I spoke evenly. I'm not talking down to you. I'm just leaving. His hand twitched at his side. I knew that motion. A lifetime of reading body language had burned it into my instincts. In training, we called it the pre-strike signal, the subtle tightening of muscles right before action. I backed up half a step, creating space the way we were taught in de-escalation drills. Gerald's face reddened. You never listen, he shouted. You never learn. I said again, calm but louder this time. I'm leaving. He lunged forward, both hands out. The shove hit my left shoulder first, hard enough to knock me off balance. My back collided with the kitchen counter. Something sharp met bone. The sound wasn't loud, just a short, wet crack that my brain recognized before my body did. Pain flooded my arm, white and immediate. I fell sideways, hitting the floor. Breath gone, world tilting. The folder scattered papers across the tile like snow. I heard Tiffany gasp, but not in shock and fascination. My mother's footsteps froze halfway toward me. Gerald stood over me, his chest heaving. For a second, no one moved. I tried to push myself up, but my left hand refused to close. The pain pulsed with my heartbeat, thick and bright. Gerald's voice came low, almost calm. Maybe now you'll listen. He turned toward my mother. You see what she makes me do? I stared at the edge of the counter where a small streak of blood smeared the wood. I wasn't thinking of the pain. I was thinking of the sound. The sharp snap that would echo in my memory far longer than the bruise. Tiffany leaned against the wall, chewing her lip, eyes cold. My mother whispered something too soft to catch. The air in the kitchen felt heavier than before. I tried again to stand. My right hand braced against the floor, my left arm hanging uselessly. I could hear my own breathing, uneven, shallow. Gerald's shadow loomed over me. You stay down until you can behave. His words were steady, like he believed them. My voice came out raw, but steady. You just made a mistake. He froze. What did you say I met his eyes? You just made a mistake, sir. He took a step back, unsure whether to yell or defend himself. My mother finally moved, reaching out a trembling hand. Gerald, stop, please. But it was too late. He had crossed the line between intimidation and evidence. Tiffany's phone was still in her hand camera, open red light blinking. Whether she meant to record or not, it captured everything. I pulled myself up slowly, leaning on the counter, each breath a knife. My left arm hung twisted at the wrist uniform sleeve torn open. The pain blurred my vision, but training kept me upright. In the field, they teach us to compartmentalize pain, identify, isolate, act. My voice came out quieter than I expected. I'm leaving. Gerald's laugh was small disbelief hiding under it. Leave. You can barely stand. I steadied myself. Then, I will crawl. The words weren't planned. They just came out cold and honest. Tiffany muttered, Dad, she's bleeding. He turned irritated. Get her a towel. My mother handed me one without looking at me. Her silence hurt worse than my arm. I pressed the towel against my sleeve, feeling the warmth of blood seeping through fabric. The uniform that once made me feel invincible now looked fragile. I walked toward the door again. Each step felt both heavy and free. Gerald called after me. You walk out that door and don't come back. I didn't answer. I opened the door and the morning sunlight hit me like clarity. The air outside smelled of pine and gasoline. For a moment, I just stood there breathing. The pain in my arm pulsed, but beneath it a colder feeling settled in. Determination. Behind me through the doorway, I could hear Tiffany's voice asking what she should tell her friends, and my mother whispering something about keeping it quiet. I turned once more toward the house. The front door half open, their silhouettes framed by the light frozen in that same pattern of silence and denial. My voice dropped low, more to myself than to them. Discipline didn't matter here, only dominance. Then I walked down the steps toward my car, one arm hanging useless at my side, each breath reminding me that something had broken, but not everything. I remember the ride to the hospital in fragments, sunlight flashing between the trees, the steady hum of tires on asphalt, and my neighbor's voice saying my name like a question she didn't know how to answer. Mrs. Owens lived 3 houses down. She'd been watering her plants when she saw me stumble onto the sidewalk, pale, clutching my arm. I didn't ask for help. She just came running, keys already in hand. By the time we reached the emergency room at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, the adrenaline had started to fade. The pain arrived in full, deep, and bright, every heartbeat hammering through my wrist. Inside, the nurses recognized my uniform immediately. "Are you stationed at Fort Liberty?" one of them asked. I nodded. She looked at the injury, then at me. "What happened, Captain?" The answer formed automatically, the same instinct that had kept me safe overseas. "Training accident." She frowned but didn't press. The doctor came in a few minutes later, tall, efficient, with the calm eyes of someone used to field casualties. He examined my wrist, rotated it gently, and I nearly blacked out. He shook his head. "Hairline fracture on the ulna partial ligament tear. You're lucky it's not worse." I wanted to laugh at that word, lucky. He asked again how it happened. I repeated training accident. The words felt heavy in my mouth like carrying someone else's weapon. He wrote it down without comment. When he left the room, I stared at the chart clipped to the bed. One lie on paper can rewrite an entire story. I told myself it was for my career. The Army doesn't look kindly on domestic disputes. They call it fraternization of family drama unfit for leadership. I told myself I was protecting my promotion, protecting my reputation, protecting everything I had fought to build. But under that logic was a simpler truth. I was still afraid of him. My mother arrived an hour later, her purse clutched tight against her chest, her face pale but dry. She closed the curtain behind her like she was entering a confession booth. "Elise," she said, her voice low, "you shouldn't have pushed him like that." My arm was wrapped in a temporary cast. The words landed heavier than the pain. "I didn't push him, Mom." He shoved me. She sighed that long exhale of disappointment she always reserved for me. "You know how he gets when you challenge him. You provoked him, Elise." My throat tightened. He broke my arm. She didn't look at me. "You'll heal." He didn't mean to. He always says that. Her eyes darted toward the curtain as if the word truth might summon witnesses. I realized then that she wasn't protecting him. She was protecting the image of stability she'd built around him. It didn't matter who bled as long as no one saw the stain. She touched the edge of my cast. "Please don't report this. It'll ruin him." I pulled my hand back. "He did that himself." She shook her head and whispered, "You always make things harder than they need to be." Then she left. I didn't see her look back. The room went silent except for the soft mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor. Across from me, a poster read, "See something, say something." I stared at it until the words blurred. The irony was cruel. A nurse came in later to set a clean blanket around my shoulders. She smiled gently. "You serving long, Captain." 10 years, I said. She nodded. "Strong women like you keep us safe." Her kindness almost broke me more than the shove did. I wanted to tell her everything. Instead, I said, "Thank you," and kept my voice steady. That night, after they transferred me to a smaller recovery room, I called the base medical office to request light duty for the next 2 weeks. The sergeant on the line sounded surprised. "You okay, ma'am?" "Training injury," I repeated. He logged it without question. I set the phone down and watched the light on the ceiling flicker. For the first time in a decade, I felt like a fraud in my own uniform. Around midnight, I tested my fingers. My pinky refused to move. A sharp jolt of panic hit me. In my field, precision mattered. I'd spent years learning to type reports, handle equipment, aim right, all with accuracy. Now, one small motion refused to obey. I stared at that still finger like it belonged to someone else. My arm was the proof of what happened, but the silence was the price. Outside the hall, lights dimmed for night mode. The world continued with its quiet efficiency. I could hear the soft squeak of shoes, the distant beeping of monitors, life going on around me like nothing had cracked. I thought about Gerald's face the moment after he pushed me. The lack of surprise, the way my mother looked at me instead of him. Somewhere deep inside, a cold understanding settled. This wasn't new. It was a continuation of every unspoken rule that had built that house: never embarrass him, never challenge him, never tell. I turned my head toward the window. The streetlights outside shimmered through the glass. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number. I ignored it. Then came a message from my mother. Rest tonight. We'll talk when things calm down. I typed back one word. No. I didn't send it. I let it sit there on the screen until the phone dimmed and went black. The nurse checked in again near dawn. She said the x-rays looked stable. My bones would heal fine. I nodded, thanking her, but the words barely landed. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone again, I looked down at my cast, the white plaster reflecting the weak morning light. The bruises were already forming around it, blooming like small reminders. I raised my hand slightly, the pain biting sharp, and whispered the truth into the empty room. That night, I realized my body could heal, but the silence might kill me. 2 days later, the plaster on my arm had hardened enough for me to move without screaming. I reported back to base wearing civilian clothes, my sling neatly pinned under a jacket to hide the cast. The soldier at the gate saluted out of habit. I returned the gesture automatically, pretending my arm didn't ache with every pulse. Inside Fort Liberty, the air always smelled like order metal paper and coffee brewed on schedules. The world here made sense. Actions had consequences. Rules protected people, not silenced them. I walked across the courtyard toward the administration building, feeling both safe and ashamed that I still needed to hide. Major Collins's office sat on the second floor, just above the operations wing. He was my commanding officer, a man known for his fairness and his blunt honesty. When I knocked on the door, he didn't look up right away. "Come in, Captain Ward." His voice carried the calm weight of someone who had seen every kind of chaos and still believed in structure. He finally looked at me and noticed the sling. "What happened?" "Training accident, sir. It came out rehearsed just like it had at the hospital." Collins tilted his head. The kind of look that told you he'd heard 1,000 lies and could spot each one by tone. "I see," he said slowly. "Sit down." I obeyed, folding carefully into the chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I got your light duty request. I'm approving it, but I want to understand what happened off record." His tone wasn't interrogative, it was protective. I stared at the insignia on his desk, tracing the reflections of light across the polished surface. "Sir, it's personal." He nodded once. "Understood. But let me say something as both an officer and a man who's been in command for 25 years. Personal does not mean invisible." I looked up. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped. "Abuse is abuse, Captain Ward. Doesn't matter if it comes from a stranger or a relative. It violates the same code." My throat tightened. I said quietly, "It was family, sir." He nodded again, no judgment in his eyes. "File a civilian report. That's an order disguised as advice." My instinct kicked in to resist. "With respect, sir, if I report it, it goes on record. Family incidents can affect a career file. The Army prefers soldiers who keep their personal lives in control." Collins's voice stayed even. "You're not in trouble because someone else lost control. You've served 10 years with distinction. You've led missions under fire. Don't start protecting the wrong person now." I wanted to believe him, but the image of Gerald's face, calm and self-assured, flashed behind my eyes. He had power in the community. He knew people. And he had my mother's silence to back him. What if he calls the base, sir? What if he says things that... Collins cut me off. "Then we'll deal with that, but we deal with truth, not fear." He leaned forward. "You serve the truth, Captain, not appearances." The words landed like a command more powerful than any order I'd received. Still, my hesitation clung. I said, "He's connected. He's on a local chamber board." "They believe him." Collins nodded. "Then collect what they can't ignore. Facts, records, proof." He slid a notepad across the desk. "Start writing everything you remember. Dates, times, statements. Don't let emotion cloud precision. That's your strength, Ward. Use it. I took the notepad with my good hand. My writing looked awkward, small tilted from the angle of the cast. I wrote May 3rd, 08:12 hours. Fayetteville residence. Shove from stepfather resulted in fractured wrist. I stopped after that line. Seeing it on paper made it real in a way the bruise never could. Collins spoke again, softer now. I can file an internal note protecting your record until you decide what to do officially. No rush. But don't stay quiet for long. Silence has a way of spreading. I nodded, unsure if I was grateful or afraid. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Take care of that arm. And Ward, don't confuse endurance with acceptance. I left his office with the notepad tucked against my chest, the words still echoing. You serve truth, not appearances. Back in the corridor, I paused by the window overlooking the base. Soldiers moved in crisp lines, vehicles hummed everything in motion. For a moment, I envied the simplicity of their orders. My own mission had no map, no timeline, only courage measured in honesty. That night, I sat at my desk in the small apartment on base housing. The notepad lay open beside my phone. The voice recorder app glowed red. I pressed record and began speaking quietly, like dictating a report. Incident 1, Fayetteville residence. Witnesses, Linda Ward and Tiffany Whitmore. Perpetrator, Gerald Whitmore. Injury, sustained fracture left wrist. Motive control. I stopped breathing slowly, the same rhythm we used in field debriefings. Every detail mattered. Dates, words, tone. I wrote down Tiffany's remark. Try being family for once, and my response in the moment Gerald said, "You'll do what you're told in this house." I added the sound that followed. Snap. It wasn't just a memory, it was evidence. I backed up the file onto my drive, labeling it Freedom Record 1. Then I scrolled through my phone and found the earlier audio I had accidentally recorded during the argument in the kitchen. When I pressed play, I heard his voice again, full of contempt, clear as a command. You're under this roof. You'll do as asked. My pulse raced, but not from fear, from focus. For years, I had been trained to analyze intelligence reports, track threats, build cases on logic, not emotion. Now I was doing it for myself. I organized the audio files, photographs of the bruises, the hospital report, and Major Collins's note approving light duty. By midnight, the folder was full. I renamed it Chain of Command, Personal File. As I shut down the laptop, the weight of exhaustion pressed against me, but under it was a small spark of relief. For the first time, I had structure, procedure, evidence, the military way of fighting back. I stared at my cast, the dull ache still constant. Collins was right. Silence spreads, but truth moves faster when you document it. I whispered into the quiet room, testing the words aloud, steady and calm, like a mission statement. This is not revenge. This is record-keeping. Then I turned off the light. The first whisper reached me 3 days after I filed the first notes into my private folder. It came through a text from Sergeant Rivera, a friend in personnel. "Ma'am, someone's been calling around asking questions about you." The message didn't say who, but I already knew. Fayetteville was a small town with long memories and loud phones. By the next morning, the rumor had grown legs. Gerald had started calling his friends in the Chamber of Commerce, local police contacts, even a pastor or two. He told them his stepdaughter had become unstable, that the Army had broken her mind. He used words like PTSD, violent episodes, aggressive tendencies. He wrapped lies in the language of concern. "We're just worried about her." It was the kind of manipulation I'd seen in interrogations, poison wrapped in pity. By the time it reached my own circle on base, it had mutated into something more dangerous. Captain Ward is on psychiatric leave. I heard it whispered in the hallway outside the intelligence office, the place I had worked for years. They weren't cruel, just cautious. In the Army, rumors move faster than clearance memos. I tried to stay professional. I attended meetings, logged reports, kept my uniform crisp. But inside, the quiet panic grew. I'd fought real enemies abroad. This was different. It was invisible, polite, and relentless. That afternoon, I logged into my personal social media for the first time in months. The first post I saw stopped me cold. Tiffany. Her profile picture showed her posing at a dinner party, glass in hand, smile perfect. The caption read, "Some soldiers never leave the battlefield behind." The comments were filled with sympathy and speculation. "Hope she gets help. Family is tough sometimes. Stay safe, girl." I stared at the words until the screen blurred. My hand trembled not from fear, but fury. She wasn't just echoing his story, she was broadcasting it, making me the villain of a narrative that painted them as victims. I started typing a response, then stopped. Every instinct told me not to engage emotionally. The Army teaches that retaliation without strategy is surrender. I closed the app, took a breath, and opened my Freedom Record folder. I added a new section, Phase 2, Smear. I saved screenshots of Tiffany's post timestamps and comments. Then I called Harper, my old friend from college and now an HR specialist at a neighboring military contractor. She picked up instantly. "Elise, are you okay?" I hesitated. "They're spreading stories, personal ones." Harper's voice hardened. "Who's they?" "My stepfather and his daughter." She exhaled sharply. "What are they saying? That I'm unstable, that I attacked him, that I'm dangerous to employ?" Silence. Then Harper said, "Elise, listen to me. If they've started that, it's already bigger than gossip. They're trying to discredit you before you report him. Classic preemptive smear." My throat went dry. "How do I fight it with documentation? You have recordings, right? I do. Good. Don't respond publicly. Build your evidence privately. Let them incriminate themselves." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thanks, Harper." She paused. "One more thing, you might want to check your Army HR portal. I got a heads up that an anonymous complaint came through your chain. Something about unprofessional conduct and verbal aggression." My chest tightened. "That's impossible." Harper's tone softened. "I know, but they'll review it. Don't panic. Send me everything if you need a witness statement." After the call, I sat at my desk, hands shaking. I logged into the HR portal. Sure enough, there it was, an internal memo marked confidential. Anonymous complaint alleging behavioral instability following personal stress. No attached evidence, no signature, just enough poison to plant doubt. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling tiles looked like maps of every time I had stayed quiet, every bruise, every remark I swallowed for peace. This time was different. I opened the notepad Collins had given me. Pattern: discredit before accountability. I wrote the dates, the quotes, the digital footprints. My hand ached, but the rhythm of the words calmed me. Facts are oxygen. Lies suffocate without it. That night, as rain tapped against the window, I replayed the recording from the kitchen again. Gerald's voice filled the room. "You'll do what you're told in this house." Then Tiffany's faint but clear, "Maybe you should stop pretending the Army makes you important." The contrast between my quiet answers and their mockery spoke louder than any report. I saved another copy labeled Primary Evidence, Audio 1. I sat in the dark, listening to the storm outside. Fayetteville rain had a way of echoing through the night, the same rhythm I used to hear in field tents before dawn. In those places, silence meant safety. Here, it meant danger. I thought about what Collins said. "You serve truth, not appearances." Truth, I realized, doesn't wait for permission. The next morning, I sent a confidential memo to the Inspector General's office requesting verification of the anonymous complaint. I kept my tone neutral and professional, the way officers are trained to sound when everything inside them is on fire. Respectfully requesting confirmation of complaint origin and verification of contact log. Attached copies of external harassment targeting my reputation. Then I pressed send. It was the first time I'd chosen offense instead of defense. Later that day, Harper messaged again. "You did the right thing, they're scared. That's why they're loud." I looked at her words and let them settle. Scared people lie louder, but soldiers record longer. I closed the message, saved every file to a second drive, and whispered to myself the new rule of survival. When they smear you, document the fingerprints they leave behind. That night, I slept with the laptop still open, the cursor blinking on the words I'd typed in my log, pattern confirmed. They fight with lies. I fight with records. And for the first time since my arm broke, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like a soldier again. The knock on my apartment door came just after sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. My arm still ached from the day wrapped in plaster like a constant reminder. I opened the door and froze. Standing there, framed by the fading orange light, was Captain Leah Monroe. Same height as me, same uniform, but with the kind of presence that always turned heads in a briefing room. We had served together in Germany years ago, two intelligence officers buried in field reports and caffeine. The last time I saw her was at the Ramstein base gym, both of us laughing over who could outrun the treadmill timer. Now her expression wasn't laughter, it was fire barely contained. "Ward," she said, eyes scanning the sling. "You going to let me in, or should I start asking questions on the porch?" I stepped aside silently. She walked in, dropped her cap on the table, and turned to face me. "What happened to your arm training accident?" I said out of reflex. She folded her arms, unimpressed. "Don't insult my intelligence. I read your face like I read coordinates." I hesitated. "She wasn't someone you lied to." Finally, I said, "Family issue." She exhaled through her nose. The stepfather I nodded. The silence that followed was the heavy kind filled with old friendship and anger on my behalf. "You reported it?" she asked. "Not yet. I'm collecting documentation." "Good." She nodded once sharp. "Because that's exactly what we're going to do." I blinked. Leah smirked the same half-smile she used when she was about to break a rule for the right reason. "You think I flew down here just for nostalgia?" I saw Tiffany's little post, the one about soldiers not leaving the battlefield. I almost threw my phone across the room. "You know how that looks to people outside the service. It paints us all as unstable." I felt a flush of shame, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because she was right. The smear didn't just threaten me, it fed every stereotype about women in uniform. "You didn't have to come," I said quietly. "I did," she replied, "because you would have done the same for me." She took off her jacket and rolled up her sleeves. "Now show me what you've got." I opened my laptop. The screen glowed against the dim light of the room, revealing folders labeled Freedom Record 1 Chain of Command and Smear Phase 2. Leah's eyes scanned the list. "You always did label things like an intelligence briefing," she muttered approvingly. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: audio recordings, screenshots, hospital discharge notes. I showed her the anonymous HR complaint. Her jaw tightened. "They're running psychological warfare," she said. "Classic deflection. Make you look unstable before you can prove abuse." That's what Harper said. Harper's right. And if they've already gone after your reputation, you need to escalate before they poison your chain. She leaned over the table, her tone shifting from friend to officer. "We're soldiers, Elise. We don't surrender, we document." The words hit something deep. For the first time in weeks, I felt that old sense of clarity. The Army had taught us both that information wins wars. Truth backed by proof was stronger than rank or rumor. So she continued, "We start with timelines. When did the incident happen? May 3rd, 0800, 12 hours. Good. Cross-reference with hospital admission." She clicked quickly, opening the file I'd saved. "Cape Fear Valley Medical Center arrival time 8:57. ER report confirms fracture consistent with impact. You've got the timestamp, the injury, and the proximity. Perfect." She copied the data into a spreadsheet. Now she said social evidence. "You said Tiffany posted publicly. Grab the URL." I did. She pasted it into the same document. "We'll build a chain verbal assault physical evidence, digital defamation. Each one links to the other. When this goes to an investigator, it'll read like a case file, not a complaint." I couldn't help smiling. "You sound like you missed intelligence work." "I miss justice," she said, her voice low. We worked in silence for a while. Outside, thunder rolled over Fayetteville, distant but growing. Leah broke the quiet first. "Do you still have the voicemail he left for your mom that night?" I frowned. I didn't check. "Check now." I hesitated, but her tone left no room for argument. I opened my messages. There it was, an audio file forwarded from my mother's phone 2 nights earlier, marked Unknown Caller. I pressed play. Gerald's voice filled the room, slurred with anger. "She's ungrateful, always has been. If she ruins my reputation, I'll ruin hers first." Leah's face hardened. "You have any idea what this is worth?" "That's intent. That's threat. We're keeping this. She dragged the file into the evidence folder. This goes straight to HR or the Inspector General, whichever route you choose. He'll deny it, I said. Of course he will. That's why you'll have transcripts too. She pulled out her own phone and opened a transcription app. Upload every recording here. AI timestamps the voice pattern automatically. They can't claim manipulation once it's verified. I looked at her overwhelmed. You came here and built an entire investigation in 2 hours. Correction, she said, grinning slightly. We did. You just forgot you already had the skills. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. He wanted to control the narrative. We'll control the data. I nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. We finished organizing everything near midnight. The storm outside had grown louder, rain tapping against the window like static. Leah closed the laptop with finality. Phase 1 done, she said. Next step is exposure. Strategic, not emotional. You picked the right battlefield, Elise, not the kitchen public accountability. I stared at her across the table, gratitude swelling quietly in my chest. You always did show up right when I was about to give up. That's what teammates are for, she said. Then, softer. You deserve peace, not punishment. I stood my cast heavy, but my shoulders lighter. We'll make sure truth stands taller than his lies. Leah smiled. That's the Elise I remember. The lights flickered once as thunder rolled close, but we didn't move. We had everything we needed, the truth, the evidence, and a plan. For the first time since the day of the shove, I didn't feel like a victim or a soldier under review. I felt like an officer taking command again. Operation Freedom File became the name I gave to a plan that felt almost ceremonial, as if putting it into a single folder would make it impossible to ignore. I opened a fresh directory on my laptop, titled it, and then began the slow task of putting paper and digital evidence together in a way that read like a professional case file. First, I scanned the ER notes from Cape Fear Valley and filed them under medical. Next, I exported audio clips, the kitchen recording I had accidentally started the voicemail my mother had forwarded, and a clipped message Gerald had left on a neighbor's phone that mentioned my name and anger in a way that suggested intent. I labeled each file, precisely date-stamped them, and created a short manifest to accompany the folder. Organization was comfort. Organization made the chaos legible. After that, I began transcribing the important snippets, the sentences that showed motive and malice. You will take her, he had said. You will do what you're told. Those phrases alone did more than any bruise to demonstrate the pattern of control I had lived under. Once the initial evidence was organized, I moved to digital traces. I opened my call log and began tracing numbers matching times to the voicemail forwards and the anonymous calls people on base had started receiving. One number appeared more than once an unlisted line that, when cross-referenced with public directories, pointed directly to a business contact listed at the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce. My stomach tightened. Gerald loved to mention his connections as if they were currency. He bragged about who he knew and where he sat on committees. That arrogance was the spine of his power. I sent a formal request to the chamber as part of the Freedom File, asking for a copy of any outgoing calls made from the main office on the dates surrounding the incident and the names of any associates contacted. The clerk on the other end was polite, but slow. I noted the delays and copied the email into my folder. Meanwhile, Leah dug into public records and found a web of small endorsements and donations, linking Gerald to local boards and civic projects. It was exactly as he had boasted. I started building a chain that showed not just violence but influence. I drafted an initial complaint outline that referenced specific incidents, cited evidence locations inside Operation Freedom File, and clearly stated the outcomes. I sought a civilian investigation into the assault, a request for protection orders if needed, and notification to the Inspector General so the Army could ensure my career was protected from retaliatory damage. Framing felt surgical. It was the opposite of the disorganized, shameful version of reporting I had always feared. I also contacted Harper, my friend in HR, and asked her to prepare a witness readiness plan. She suggested we assemble sworn witness statements from neighbors who had seen me leave the house, and from medical staff who had treated me, and she agreed to buffer the file with an HR letter outlining the harmful effects of smear campaigns in an employment context. I recorded every call and saved every email thread. Then came a turn I had not expected. While cross-referencing numbers, I discovered that some of Gerald's calls to a human resource line at a small local firm had been forwarded to a personal cell that matched the number my neighbor had credited to Gerald. In other words, he had called around and used his business relationships to start preemptive narratives before I even filed anything with civilian authorities. That discovery changed the tone of our work. This was not merely an ugly family scene. It was intentional reputation management. It was a coordinated attempt to make my testimony sound unreliable before I spoke. That realization hardened my plan. I would not merely collect evidence. I would weaponize procedure. I wrote a letter to the City Ethics Board documenting the outreach and provided proof of the calls and the timelines. I filed a parallel request with the Inspector General's office at Fort Liberty, attaching audio hospital notes, a request for expedited review of any external contacts with the base about my conduct, and a note that Gerald had influence in local civic circles. Order replaced chaos. He had tried to hide boots behind civility. I had returned with a ledger of truth. Leah and I rehearsed what would happen if Gerald tried to deny everything. We created an evidence map with timestamps and public records. We prepared a short public statement measured that could be released to the press if investigators delayed. It was strange to feel so tactical about my own life, to treat an assault like an operation briefing, but it was necessary. Power behaved predictably when confronted with process. Gerald liked spectacle and whisper campaigns. He did not like paperwork. He had made the mistake of believing influence could outrun the law. As the folder grew, the unglamorous truth emerged in black and white calls, voicemails chain of custody for a hospital swab, witness statements from a neighbor who had driven me to the ER, a record of Tiffany's social posts, and the dates and times of each. Every piece stacked against the narrative he tried to build. By the time we labeled the folder Operation Freedom File and encrypted it with a passphrase only Leah and I knew, I felt something difficult to name, less fear and more readiness. The violence had happened. The smear had begun. The response was now mapped, ordered, and unstoppable because it was governed by law and ethics, not fury. Operation Freedom File was complete by the time Leah looked up from my laptop and said, "Now we take it outside the walls." She meant the truth, not revenge. She had spent 10 years in intelligence work, and she knew exposure was sometimes the only way to neutralize an enemy who operated through reputation. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "There's a journalist at the Fayetteville Observer. Her name's Dana Kirk. She did a whole series last year on veteran abuse and civic corruption. She'll know how to handle this." I hesitated. "You think going public is smart? What if it backfires?" Leah shook her head. "You've been quiet long enough. You have proof, not gossip." That's the difference. That night we wrote the email together. It was measured factual, detached everything a military report should be. Subject line, anonymous submission, evidence of local harassment against Army officer. The body included only 3 paragraphs, each concise. The first identified the timeline and the context: an Army officer preparing for promotion assaulted by her stepfather, a businessman with connections in Fayetteville. The second paragraph outlined the proof: audio recordings, hospital discharge summaries, social media harassment, and phone records linking him to calls made to an HR department. The third contained a single audio clip, Gerald's voice saying, "If she ruins my reputation, I'll ruin hers first." We hit send. Then we waited. The Observer had a small newsroom but a strong reputation. Dana responded within 24 hours. Her message was brief but direct. "This is serious. We'll verify before publishing. Do not contact local law enforcement until we confirm authenticity." Leah looked up from the screen. "She's good," she said. "Fast but cautious." Over the next few days, Dana requested verification. I provided metadata for each file and a copy of the hospital's incident report. She replied again. "We've confirmed Chamber of Commerce phone logs match your timestamps. This story holds." My pulse jumped reading those words. By the following week, the Fayetteville Observer published the piece online under the headline, "Local Businessman Accused of Threatening Army Officer Before Promotion." The story didn't name me. It didn't have to. The article focused on the behavior how a prominent local figure with political ties allegedly made calls to discredit a female service member, how an anonymous source provided audio proof of intimidation, and how the Chamber of Commerce was reviewing his conduct. Within hours, the link spread through Fort Liberty like wildfire. Soldiers shared it in group chats, veterans posted it on Facebook, spouses forwarded it in emails. Every comment thread carried the same tone: anger, disbelief, and solidarity. If he threatened one of ours, he threatened all of us. Leah watched the numbers climb on her phone, the views ticking upward every minute. "You just lit a signal fire," she said quietly. That night the phone calls started, but this time they weren't threats. They were reporters, veteran advocates, even a few local politicians wanting to distance themselves from him. The Chamber of Commerce issued a short statement the next morning. The organization is aware of serious allegations against Mr. Gerald Whitmore. He has been temporarily suspended from all leadership activities pending review. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first crack in his armor. 2 days later, the Observer followed up with a second article citing additional corroborating evidence provided to their newsroom. They quoted a line from the audio recording: "You'll do what you're told in this house." The quote hit harder than I expected. Seeing it printed in black and white turned a private humiliation into a public reckoning. The headline trended on social media: "Power Control and Silence. The Hidden Cost of Family Abuse Among Military Women." I scrolled through the comments late into the night. "Whoever that soldier is, she's braver than half the town combined. We stand with her. This man needs to be investigated." The story reached the base command the next morning. Major Collins called me into his office. "You didn't write this article, did you?" he asked. "No, sir," I said truthfully, "but everything in it is accurate." He nodded slowly. "Then the truth speaks for itself. The Chamber has already contacted our PR unit. They're afraid this will get bigger." It did. Within a week, the Fayetteville business community was in damage control. Gerald's name disappeared from committee lists and promotional flyers. A public meeting of the Chamber of Commerce was called to review ethics compliance. Leah and I watched the live stream from my laptop. Gerald sat at the end of a long table, his suit pressed, his expression calm but pale. When the chairwoman read the findings, verified contact with external HR departments regarding a U.S. Army officer violation of confidentiality protocol, he didn't flinch. When she said the words "effective immediately," Mr. Whitmore is relieved of his position as chairman. He blinked once and looked straight at the camera as if daring the world to pity him. No one did. The local news replayed the clip that night with captions. It aired between weather updates and traffic reports, ordinary as any civic notice. But to me, it felt monumental. For years he had controlled the narrative, and now it was public record that he'd been the aggressor. I sat back on the couch and whispered, "That's accountability." Leah leaned forward, her eyes still on the screen. Not justice yet, but close. The next morning, I woke to an inbox full of messages from strangers. Veterans, Army spouses, even civilian women who had lived their own versions of silence. One message stood out. "You reminded me that discipline doesn't mean obedience." Thank you. I saved that one. When Leah left later that day, she paused at the door. "You know what this means, right?" she said. "You've just gone from target to precedent." I nodded. "Let's make sure the precedent sticks." She smiled. "We will." I closed the door, turned back toward my desk, and opened Operation Freedom file one more time. I added a final entry at the bottom of the manifest result. Public exposure initiated. Subject suspended from position. Case under review. Then I saved the document, encrypted it, and whispered, "Mission complete, Phase 1. The story went live on a Thursday. By Saturday, Fayetteville looked different. The Chamber of Commerce building had cameras parked outside, reporters in windbreakers doing live updates about the businessman under investigation. Every store I walked into had people whispering in small circles. My mother didn't call. Tiffany didn't post. But Gerald did what I had known he would do. He came looking for me. It was almost poetic how predictable he was. I heard the knock just after sunset. Hard, deliberate 3 strikes against the door like a warning. I already knew that rhythm. I didn't answer at first, but his voice followed rough and furious. "Elise, you ruined me." The hallway echoed. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline control, the same steadiness that carried me through field drills. I opened the door halfway, the chain lock still in place. He stood there red-eyed, the same cologne and arrogance he'd always worn, only this time stripped of status. "You think this is over?" he shouted. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone I know." His voice broke on the last word. For a brief second, he looked less like a man and more like a cornered animal. I kept my tone even. "I didn't embarrass you. You did that yourself. You sent them those files," he growled. "You called that reporter. I didn't use your name, Gerald, but you used mine when you called HR." His hands clenched at his sides. "You can't prove that." I tilted my head. "Actually, I already did." That was when Tiffany appeared behind him, phone in hand, recording. "Smile for the camera, Captain," she said mockingly. "Let's show everyone how crazy you really are." I sighed. "You're still doing his dirty work." "He's my dad," she said, as if that explained everything. Gerald's face twisted, veins visible at his temple. "Delete that article, Elise. I can still make this go away." "No, Gerald, you can't." He took a step closer, hand brushing against the door. I stepped back, my phone already in my pocket recording. My voice stayed steady. "Leave my property. You think I'm afraid of your little rank," he snapped. "You're nothing outside that uniform." I almost smiled. "Then why are you here begging a nobody?" He froze. The silence between us stretched long enough for Tiffany's phone to capture every breath. He lunged forward, hitting the door hard enough to rattle the frame, but the chain lock held. "You will regret this," he yelled. I pressed the emergency record key on my own phone, one button that automatically saved video and uploaded to a cloud folder. My voice came out cold. "This is a warning, Gerald. Any further contact will be reported." "You don't scare me," he hissed. "You never did." "I don't have to," I said. "The law will." I closed the door, slow and deliberate. His shouting continued for another minute, muffled now, until the sound of tires peeling away replaced his voice. I stayed still, counting the seconds until silence. When I opened the door again, the porch was empty except for a crushed coffee cup he had thrown against the steps. My neighbors were outside, pretending not to look. One woman, Mrs. Owens, gave me a small nod. The next morning, I learned what Tiffany had done. Leah called at 6 a.m., voice sharp. "You need to check social media." I opened my phone. There it was, a 30-second clip posted on TikTok under the caption, "Unstable Soldier Attacks Her Own Stepfather." It showed Gerald pounding on the door, my voice from behind the frame saying, "This is a warning, Gerald," then a quick cut to me stepping forward. The video ended before his shove, before the threats, before the context. Comments were already piling up. Another angry vet. "This is why they need therapy before they get rank. Whoever she is, she's scary." I exhaled, long and slow. "They cut it," I said. Leah replied, "Of course they did, but you have the full version right. Every second." "Good. Then we'll make sure the right people see it." That afternoon, I sent the complete unedited video to the Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Liberty, along with the audio logs from my front porch. My message was short and precise, the same tone I used in official reports. Subject: harassment and retaliation by civilian relative. Attached video-audio timeline. Request review and protective order. The response came quicker than I expected. Less than 24 hours later, 2 CID agents arrived at my apartment. They introduced themselves by rank and badge, professional but kind. "Captain Ward, we received your submission. We're opening an investigation effective immediately. May we record a statement?" I nodded. "Of course." We sat at the kitchen table where Leah and I had built Operation Freedom File. The agents reviewed the clips. The first leaned forward, rewinding twice to the point where Gerald's voice shouted, "You ruined me!" The second agent took notes, occasionally glancing up. When it ended, she said quietly, "This isn't just harassment. This is intimidation after exposure." I met her eyes. "He's trying to rewrite the story, and he just gave you proof of retaliation." They asked for copies of my prior records, the ER report, the chamber investigation, the audio from his earlier calls. I handed over a USB drive with everything organized by folder, labeled, and time-stamped. One of them raised an eyebrow. "You should teach a course on evidence management." "Intelligence work," I said. "Old habits." When they left, the apartment felt lighter somehow. For once, the system was moving in the right direction. That night, I called Harper to update her. CID's handling it, I said. They have the files. She exhaled. Good. Once the military police open a case, the civilian authorities can't ignore it. He's out of control, Elise, but he's not untouchable. He's desperate, I replied. That makes him sloppy. Harper was quiet for a moment. You sound different, she said finally. Calmer, I smiled faintly. Because this time, truth is the weapon. I ended the call and sat in the quiet, watching the cursor blink on my laptop screen. I opened a new document titled It Retaliation Report and began typing June 12, 2024. Subject approached residents, shouted threats recorded by witness. Attempted character defamation through edited video. Response reported to CID investigation active. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, then steadied. My arm still ached when I moved it, but the pain felt different now, less like a wound, more like proof that I had survived something meant to silence me. They had used lies, gossip, and half-truths to paint me unstable. Now every word they'd spoken was turning into evidence against them. I looked at the white sling folded on the back of the chair and whispered to myself, "Let them rage. I've got the record." The soldier in me had finally returned, not with weapons or armor, but with discipline, patience, and paper trails. They had taught me that silence protected them. I was done protecting anyone but the truth. The investigation began faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of my CID report, coordination letters were exchanged between Fort Liberty's legal office and the Fayetteville Police Department. The words joint jurisdiction and parallel inquiry appeared in every email header. It meant one thing: they were taking it seriously. 2 agents from CID returned to collect additional evidence while Fayetteville detectives contacted the hospital to verify my ER record. For the first time since the shove, I felt like the truth had an audience that couldn't be manipulated with charm or donations. Gerald's world, built on handshakes and favors, had collided with mine, built on rules and documentation. The friction burned immediately. By Monday, local media ran a follow-up story. Police Army investigators open case into civilian assault on officer. The article didn't name me, but quoted an Army spokesperson confirming that appropriate cooperation is ongoing. It was enough to make him furious. He started calling people again, this time shouting instead of whispering. The same contacts who once praised him now kept their distance. The Chamber of Commerce replaced his nameplate with a blank space. A spokesperson for the city confirmed his consulting contract was under review for ethical violations. The polite phrasing couldn't hide the truth: he had been suspended. A week later, the review board voted unanimously to terminate his contract. The statement cited conduct unbecoming of a city partner. I read the press release 3 times. Every sentence was careful and legalistic, but beneath the language I could hear the echo of everything he had done. The consequences had begun. My mother called that night. Her number appeared on the screen like a ghost from another life. I hesitated before answering. "Elise," she said, immediately, voice shaking, "what are you doing?" "They're saying terrible things about your stepfather." "They're saying true things," I replied. "You're destroying our family." "No, Mom," I said softly. "I'm ending the part of it that destroyed me." She sniffed, trying to sound composed. "He's miserable. He can't sleep. People are avoiding him." "You've made your point." "My point," I said carefully, "was accountability." She raised her voice. "He loved you like his own." I laughed quietly. "If that's love, then maybe we should redefine the word." Silence. Then she whispered, "He said you attacked him." "Of course he did. That's what men like him do when the world stops believing them. You could have handled this privately." "I tried that for 10 years, I said. "It didn't work." The line went quiet. I almost hung up before she added, barely audible, "He's all I have left." I closed my eyes, exhaustion replacing anger. "Then, that's your choice." I ended the call. The next morning, I gave another statement to CID. They asked for clarity about the timeline, the physical evidence, and the social media aftermath. I explained the edited video Tiffany had posted and how it had triggered further harassment. The agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, asked, "Do you believe she acted on her own?" No, I said. She follows his orders, the agent nodded. We're subpoenaing her phone records anyway. Within days, word spread that investigators had seized both their devices for digital forensics. It felt surreal to watch the people who had humiliated me now scrambling to justify their behavior under oath. Tiffany's Facebook page went dark. Her friends began unfollowing her accounts, some even commenting under old photos. You lied. Can't believe we defended you. Disgusting. The internet had turned. The same audience that once believed their lies now devoured the truth with righteous fury. Leah sent me screenshots of the backlash with a single line. Poetic justice is underrated. Gerald, meanwhile, tried to spin a new narrative. He told local papers he was cooperating fully and deeply concerned about misunderstanding within the family. His lawyer released a statement about a domestic disagreement exaggerated by media attention. The Fayetteville Observer countered with leaked portions of the CID summary confirming the authenticity of the audio evidence. Each leak stripped away another layer of his facade. By late June, the city officially terminated his consultancy contract. The statement was brief. Due to verified ethical concerns and active investigations, Mr. Whitmore will no longer serve as external advisor to city offices. He had built his identity around those titles. Now they were gone. The community that once admired him crossed the street to avoid him. The irony was almost biblical. Harper called from her office that afternoon. You made the front page again, she said. He's out. I smiled faintly. I saw. How do you feel? She asked. I paused, like the air's finally clean. But peace wasn't immediate. My mother sent one more message that night. You've humiliated us. People are gossiping. Please stop before it gets worse. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. It's already worse. It's just visible now. I turned off my phone and looked around my apartment, the stack of case files, the cast still resting by the couch, the laptop that had become both my shield and sword. Outside, thunder rolled over Fayetteville again, like the same storm had been circling for months, and finally decided to break. The following week, CID invited me to a final review meeting. 2 agents, a military attorney, and 1 representative from the Fayetteville PD sat around a small table. The attorney began, Captain Ward, we've completed our joint review. The evidence supports your statement of assault and sustained defamation. Civil charges are now proceeding under the district attorney's office. The Army will issue a protective order ensuring no contact. My throat tightened. So it's official. Yes, ma'am, the agent said. It's on record. Relief came in strange waves, quiet, almost weightless. The attorney slid a paper toward me. This is your copy of the civilian findings. You've done everything by the book. You should be proud. I nodded, though pride wasn't the word. It was closure, maybe, or the beginning of it. After the meeting, Leah and I walked across the base toward the parking lot. She looked at me sideways. You realize this is going to follow him for life. Good, I said. Let it. You sure you're ready for what comes next? He spent years rewriting my story, I said. Now it's written in ink he can't erase. She smiled satisfied. That's the soldier I remember. As we reached her car, the sound of jets roared overhead, a routine flight drill. I looked up at the sky, bright and endless, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped beneath it. Gerald had lost his contracts, his credibility, and the respect he valued more than family. Tiffany had lost her social circle and her platform. My mother had lost the illusion of control. And me, I had lost fear. That was the only thing that ever mattered. Justice hadn't been quick, but it had been thorough. In the Army, we call that operational success. August 20 to 24 arrived like the slow pull of a storm, heavy and inevitable. Fayetteville's courthouse sat under a gray sky that morning, the kind of Carolina heat that pressed down on the back of your neck and refused to lift. I parked across the street from the main entrance and sat in my car for a moment, staring at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My hair was tied tight, my Army uniform perfectly pressed ribbons aligned with precision. The scar on my left forearm, faint but visible, peeked out just above my wrist cuff. The symbol of everything that had brought me here. When I finally stepped out, the air smelled faintly of asphalt and pine. Leah met me on the steps wearing civilian clothes, but standing like a soldier anyway. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air conditioning humming over the quiet shuffle of papers and murmurs from reporters. The case title flashed on the docket screen: State of North Carolina v. Gerald Whitmore, Assault and Defamation. The clerk called us forward, and the defense table was already occupied. Gerald sat beside his attorney, immaculate as always, in a dark blue suit. He didn't look at me at first, but when he finally did, there was no apology in his eyes, just confusion that his power had truly run out. My mother sat 2 rows behind him, her face pale, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Tiffany wasn't there. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Harris presided, an older woman known for her precision and intolerance of theatrics. She adjusted her glasses, glanced between the prosecution and defense, then said evenly, "Let's proceed." The prosecution began by outlining the facts, the ER report, the digital evidence, the public threats, and the follow-up harassment. They kept it clinical, deliberate, the language stripped of drama. The first witness was Dr. Patel, the ER physician who had treated my injury. He spoke calmly, describing the fracture, the swelling, and how the break pattern was consistent with a direct shove or push against a hard surface. He didn't embellish. His medical terms were exact. When the defense tried to imply the injury could have been from an accident, Dr. Patel said simply, "Not unless she tripped into a wall with deliberate force." The courtroom stayed silent. Then came the audio. The prosecutor announced Exhibit 14, recorded statement made by the defendant on May 3, 2024. My breath caught as the speakers crackled to life. Gerald's voice filled the room, deep and dismissive. "Army discipline doesn't make her special. She's not important to anyone." There was a pause on the recording. My voice faint in the background, then his again. Louder, harsher. "Her future doesn't matter." The sound echoed through the courtroom like a confession. My mother lowered her head. Gerald's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. The prosecutor stopped the tape. "Your Honor," she said quietly. Those are the words that followed the shove that sent Captain Ward to the emergency room. Judge Harris nodded once. Noted. The defense tried to counter, of course. They painted a picture of family tension, miscommunication, and media exploitation. My client, the attorney said, was a respected community member whose reputation was unfairly targeted by an anonymous online campaign. The alleged assault was an accident during a heated argument, nothing more. The prosecutor rose immediately. Then why did he call her employer Your Honor? Why did he spread false claims of instability to the Army's HR department? Why was the audio recording found on his personal phone? The attorney stammered. "We don't contest the call, but—" Judge Harris cut in. "Counselor, you may want to stop while you're behind." There was a faint ripple of restrained laughter from the press bench. The defense sat down. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked to the front of the courtroom, heels steady against the polished wood floor. I raised my right hand, swore the oath, and sat. The prosecutor's voice softened. "Captain Ward, can you tell the court why this case matters to you?" I looked straight ahead, not at Gerald, not at my mother, but at the judge. "Because silence protects the wrong people," I said. For years, I believed keeping peace meant keeping quiet. It doesn't. It just means you absorb the violence alone. "And what does justice mean to you now?" she asked. I paused. "It means accountability. It means his actions follow him the way my scars follow me." The prosecutor nodded. "No further questions." The defense approached cautiously. "Captain Ward, isn't it true that you've had disagreements with your family before?" "Yes," I said. "Like most families. And you've been deployed overseas, stressful conditions, long hours, trauma exposure. Could that have affected your perception?" "No," I said calmly, but it clearly affected his. A few people in the back snickered quietly. The defense lawyer sighed, defeated. "No further questions." Judge Harris leaned back. "Thank you, Captain Ward. You may step down." When I returned to my seat, Leah gave me a subtle nod. The judge took a long moment before speaking again. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, "this court has reviewed overwhelming evidence of your conduct, recordings, testimony, documentation. You have demonstrated a consistent pattern of intimidation and deceit toward the victim. However, considering your age and lack of prior criminal record, the court will impose probation rather than incarceration. You are hereby sentenced to 3 years supervised probation and a restraining order prohibiting any contact or indirect communication with Captain Ward. Gerald's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently, but the judge continued. You will also complete mandatory counseling and community service under supervision. Violate these terms and the suspended sentence becomes active. The gavel struck once sharp final. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. My mother gasped audibly. Gerald sat frozen, staring at the table, the reality of his downfall settling in like slow poison. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I stood and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, I said softly, thank you for your fairness. Justice isn't revenge. It's correction. The judge gave a faint nod. Well, said Captain. I turned to leave, feeling Leah's presence beside me as the reporters started scribbling. The flash of a camera went off, then another. Outside, the August air was heavy again, but it didn't feel suffocating. This time, it felt earned. My mother called my name from the courthouse steps. I stopped, but didn't turn. You got what you wanted, she said. No, I replied without looking back. I got what was right. Leah placed a hand on my shoulder. You did more than that, she said. You reminded people that truth has rank too. I looked at the courthouse behind us, the building where my voice had finally replaced his lies, and for the first time I allowed myself to breathe without guilt. Justice had spoken not loudly, not violently, but clearly enough for the world to hear. September 2024 came with the first cool wind. Fayetteville had felt in months, a small mercy after the heavy summer that had burned through my life and left it changed forever. The morning of the ceremony, the sky above Fort Liberty was clear, an endless blue dome that mirrored the calm I hadn't felt in years. I stood in front of the mirror inside the officers' quarters, fastening my freshly pressed uniform, each movement deliberate, ritualistic. The silver bars gleamed on the table beside me, the insignia that would soon be pinned to my chest. Captain. The title had always been a goal, a rank earned through precision and grit, but now it meant something larger. It wasn't just about leadership, it was about survival. Leah arrived early, her uniform immaculate as ever, a faint grin on her face. You look like someone who's about to rewrite a chapter, she said. I glanced at my reflection, the faint scar tracing across my forearm still visible under the sleeve. Maybe just close one properly, I replied. She handed me a folded note. From Major Collins. He said, don't open it until after the ceremony. I nodded and tucked it into my pocket. Outside the parade field shimmered in sunlight. The grand hall near the reviewing stand was already filled with rows of chairs draped in white cloth, the U.S. flag centered behind a polished wooden podium. Soldiers in dress uniforms moved quietly, their boots echoing across the marble floor. The atmosphere carried that blend of discipline and pride that only the Army could summon. As I entered, a few people turned recognition flickered in their eyes, the kind that said, we read the story. No one mentioned it directly, but their nods carried something between respect and silent acknowledgement. Major Collins stood near the stage, reviewing the list of honorees. He was a man who never smiled for ceremony, only for purpose. Yet when he saw me, his mouth lifted slightly. Captain Ward, he said, almost official. Yes, sir, I replied. You've had quite a year, he added, tone even but warm, and you've earned this twice over. The music began, the low hum of the Army band filling the hall, steady like heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of brass polish and starch. Families filled the seats, proud parents whispering, kids fidgeting. For a moment, I thought of my mother wondering if she'd even seen the announcement. The court order had made contact impossible, but part of me hoped she'd found the live stream link. Maybe she'd see what real discipline looked like. My name was called near the end of the list. Lieutenant Elise Ward promoted to the rank of Captain United States Army. The words echoed clear and strong. I stepped forward, boots striking in rhythm, chin lifted, shoulders back. The applause felt distant, as if my body were moving through muscle memory, while my mind stood still somewhere else. Major Collins took the insignia from the aide and pinned it just above my heart. Captain Ward, he said loudly so the entire hall could hear. You've shown the kind of courage our uniforms stand for. Not on the battlefield, but in the places where silence can do the most harm. A quiet ripple moved through the room, soldiers nodding, families glancing toward one another, understanding more than words aloud. Collins stepped back and saluted. Congratulations, Captain. I returned the salute, my right arm lifting clean and sharp, the healed tendons stretching under the weight of that moment. The scar ached faintly, but it felt like a reminder rather than a wound. The band began the anthem again, and as the camera crews from the base media unit moved closer for footage, I caught a glimpse of myself on the small monitor uniform. Perfect eyes steady, a faint smile touching my lips. That was the frame that later went viral. Captain Elise Ward salutes despite broken arm. The clip spread fast across military forums and veteran pages. Some saw it as inspiration, others as quiet defiance, but the story behind it was mine alone. After the ceremony, Collins motioned for me to follow him to the side of the hall. He handed me a glass of water and said softly, "Do you understand what you just did in there?" "Accepted a promotion, sir," I said. "No," he replied. "You reminded every soldier watching that strength isn't measured by the absence of pain. It's measured by how you keep standing in spite of it." He paused, studying me. "They'll remember this, Ward, not just because of the story, but because you didn't let it define you." "Thank you, sir," I said quietly. "For everything." He nodded once. "Now open that note." I reached into my pocket and unfolded the paper. His handwriting was neat, all caps, the way he always wrote briefings. "Leadership isn't about control. It's about clarity. You found yours the hard way. Carry it forward." I smiled. "Permission to frame this." "Granted," he said. Leah joined us, slipping her cap under her arm. "You know, Captain, you just broke the internet again," she teased. "That salute video has 1 million views." I groaned softly. "Great. Just what I needed." "Don't pretend you hate it," she said. "You earned every second." Maybe I admitted, but I didn't do it for clicks. "No," she said seriously. "You did it for every soldier who's been told their pain doesn't count. That's why it matters." Outside, the ceremony dissolved into laughter cameras and handshakes. The brass gleamed in the sun. I walked alone toward the flagpole at the edge of the field. The wind tugged at the edges of my uniform as I looked up at the stars and stripes waving high above. My reflection in the polished base plate caught my eye. Calm, centered, unbroken. Somewhere deep in my chest, the tension that had lived there for months finally eased. The noise behind me faded, replaced by the distant hum of aircraft taking off. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was fighting for my name. I was standing under it. When Leah caught up, she stood beside me in silence. "You know she said you could take leave. Go somewhere quiet. Rest." I looked at the flag again. "Maybe I said, but for now I think I'll just breathe." She smiled. "Fair enough, Captain." As we walked back toward the hall, the sun hit the brass on my chest just right. I thought of everything that had led here the night of the shove, the hospital, the courtroom, the headlines, and felt the strange peace of knowing that even broken things could shine. The scar on my arm would fade, but the lesson never would. Strength isn't loud. It's disciplined, deliberate, and silent when it needs to be. I had worn pain like armor for too long. Today, I got to wear rank instead. 2 months after the ceremony, the rhythm of my life finally began to resemble something close to peace. My mornings started with a jog around the base perimeter, crisp air cutting through the pine trees near Fort Liberty. The days were simple briefings, intelligence summaries, quiet lunches in the mess hall where no one looked at me with pity anymore. The world had moved on. But late one Friday evening, as the last light faded over Fayetteville, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over decline. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it, but curiosity won the old reflex of duty that still lingered somewhere under the scar tissue. I pressed answer. "Elise," she said, breathless, as if she'd run to make the call. Her voice carried that familiar tone, half command, half desperation. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. I just listened. "It's about your stepfather," she continued quickly. "And Tiffany." I waited, the silence forcing her to fill it. He's lost everything, she blurted finally. The chamber contracts his business partners, they all pulled out. The bank froze the line of credit. He can't pay the mortgage or lease. We're going to lose the house. Her words tumbled out fast and frantic. And Tiffany, she hesitated, voice cracking. They expelled her from college. There was some issue with financial paperwork, tuition aid under her name, but they found irregularities. They're saying it's fraud. She might face charges. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, staring at the stack of folders I'd been organizing, intel reports, promotion paperwork, my new assignment briefing for DC. Everything in my life was finally clean, structured, in order. And now, the ghosts were calling. You called it family when I was bleeding, I said evenly. Now it's just convenient. She sighed, the sound heavy wet with tears. Elise, please. You can't still hate us. We made mistakes. We were under pressure. I closed my eyes. Pressure doesn't make people cruel, Mom. It reveals the ones who already are. He's changed, she whispered. He's ashamed. He says he wishes he could take it back. Does he wish he hadn't called my employer or that he hadn't been caught? Silence stretched between us. Then she tried a new tactic, the guilt she'd used all my life. You think this feels good for me, watching my husband fall apart, watching your sister lose everything? You think I don't suffer too? You suffer, I said, but you still choose him, because he's my husband. She snapped the control, returning to her voice. And you're my daughter. We're still family. I laughed softly. No, we're related by DNA. Family is earned. Her breathing quickened. Elise, we need money. Just a loan. Until we can sell the property. I didn't move. The same property he bought with the chamber's reputation. It's not like that, she protested. It's still our home. I walked to the window, watching headlights pass on the quiet street below. Home, I repeated. That house was a battlefield, and you called it family values. You're being cruel, she whispered. I'm being honest, I replied. She tried again, softer this time. I know you have a good salary now. The Army gives you benefits. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. We could lose everything. You already did, I said. You lost me. For a moment, I almost felt pity. The tone of her breathing, the fragility, reminded me of nights when she'd hide in her room while Gerald raged downstairs. I'd used to believe she was a victim too. But victims don't stay silent when someone else bleeds for them. Elise, she said again, her voice trembling. He's sick, the stress. It's affecting his heart. The doctor says he needs rest medication. He can't work. He didn't have trouble raising his hand when he shoved me into that wall, I said quietly. Maybe now he can feel what consequences weigh like. You've changed, she said bitterly. You're cold. I let out a slow breath. No, Mom. I'm just not yours to manipulate anymore. The air in my apartment felt still heavy. Outside, a siren wailed, faintly fading into the distance. I loved you, she said suddenly. We both did in our own way. Love doesn't break bones, I said, and it doesn't stay silent after it happens. She sniffled again, searching for one last weapon. Do you really want to see us homeless? Your own mother. I looked at the clock. 9:37 p.m. The second hand moved in a slow, perfect rhythm. Steady, patient, unflinching. You're adults, I said finally. You built the fire. You can put it out yourselves. Elise, please. Goodbye, Mom. The words came out calm, almost gentle, but final. I hung up before she could respond. For a long moment, I stood there in the dark kitchen phone, still warm in my hand. The weight that had once lived between my ribs, the old mixture of guilt and duty, was gone. What replaced it was something sharper, but cleaner. Boundaries. The kind of discipline they never taught at home, but the Army drilled into my bones. Leah texted 5 minutes later as if she could sense something. You okay, Captain? I stared at the screen before typing back. They called. Wanted money. I said no. A moment later, her reply appeared. Good. That's how freedom sounds. I smiled faintly. The city outside hummed, the streetlights glowing amber against the asphalt. Somewhere in that same town, Gerald was probably sitting in a dark living room counting the things he'd lost, and for once, I didn't care. I turned off the light, walked toward my desk, and wrote a note on a small yellow sticky pad. Discipline means knowing when to stop fighting battles that aren't yours. I stuck it to my laptop screen right above the folder labeled Operation Freedom File. The file was closed, archived complete. I whispered, "Mission accomplished." Then I silenced my phone, poured a glass of water, and let the quiet fill the room. For the first time, it wasn't empty. It was peace. The weeks after my mother's call were quiet in a way that felt almost ceremonial. The noise had ended. No reporters, no threats, no apologies that arrived too late. It was just me, my uniform, and the rhythm of duty. That silence gave me time to finish something I'd been building since the night I first wrote Operation Freedom File. I called it The Report. It wasn't about revenge or records anymore. It was about prevention. I wanted what happened to me to mean something more than a headline. So I opened a new document and began drafting my final memo to the Army's Ethics Office. The title came naturally, Family Abuse Awareness for Soldiers. The first line read like an order but felt like an admission discipline without empathy becomes silence. Silence becomes damage. I structured it the way I'd learned in intelligence briefings, problem evidence proposal resolution. Under problem statement, I wrote service members often face domestic control and emotional coercion in civilian contexts that go unreported due to career fear stigma or loyalty conflict. Under evidence, I listed anonymized data from CID military family services and public records about domestic cases involving service members carefully redacted but real. Then came proposal establish an internal awareness and resilience training focused on identifying family-based manipulation, emotional control, and reporting safety protocols without career penalty. I cited my own case as a silent example. No names, no accusations, just facts. When I reached the final section, resolution objective, I paused before typing. When soldiers understand that courage applies off the battlefield too, the Army becomes stronger, not weaker. The report ended with a quote from Major Collins, one he'd told me months earlier. "You serve truth, not appearances." I printed the report, added the attachments timeline resource list, draft policy recommendations, and submitted it through the official Ethics Office portal with a short note, respectfully submitted by Captain Elise Ward, Intelligence Division, Fort Liberty. I didn't expect to hear back. Ethics memos rarely got traction unless a general signed off, but 2 weeks later I received an email marked High Priority. The subject line read, "Your proposal has been reviewed." I clicked it heart steady. The message was from Colonel Avery, Chief of the Ethics Office. It read simply, "Captain Ward, your proposal demonstrates significant leadership insight. Approved for pilot training module under Resilience and Integrity Initiative. You are invited to present at the Fort Belvoir seminar next quarter." I reread the email twice, then a third time just to let it sink in. The very thing my family tried to use against me, my discipline, my insistence on order, had become the tool that changed the rules. The following month, I was flown to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The base had that crisp, structured look every Army installation carried, but the auditorium felt different modern light-filled rows of officers and civilians mixed together. The banner above the stage read, "Boundaries Beyond the Battlefield, Ethics and Personal Resilience in Service." I stood backstage, uniform, crisp notes in hand, the weight of the moment pressing on my shoulders. Leah stood beside me now, promoted herself, her smile soft but fierce. "You ready?" she asked. "Always," I said. The moderator introduced me as Captain Elise Ward, Intelligence Officer and Program Developer for Family Abuse Awareness for Soldiers. Applause followed, polite but genuine. I stepped onto the stage, the lights warm against my face, the crowd blurring into silhouettes. My voice came out steady. "Good morning. I'm Captain Ward, and I'm here to talk about a different kind of battlefield, one that exists behind closed doors." The room fell silent. I continued. In the Army, we're taught to recognize external threats, ambushes, surveillance, cyber attacks. But the hardest battles to identify are the ones we normalize. The ones that happen in our homes, our families, our private spaces. The ones we don't report because we think endurance is loyalty. Heads nodded across the front rows. I paced slowly, hands relaxed at my sides. When I joined the Army at 21, I believed discipline meant silence. I believed loyalty meant obedience. I was wrong. Discipline means self-control, not submission. Loyalty means integrity, not complicity. A few people began writing notes. One young sergeant in the front row had tears in her eyes. I looked at her, then back at the audience. Courage isn't the absence of fear, I said, pausing on the words. It's refusing to serve the wrong command. The quote hung in the air for several seconds. Someone in the back whispered, "That's it." I finished with a slide outlining new procedures, clear channels for reporting abuse without it affecting service records, automatic counseling referrals, and a mentorship network pairing officers who'd survived family control with those currently struggling to leave it. When I ended, the applause rose slowly at first, then gained strength, long sustained, not out of sympathy but respect. Afterward, several officers approached me, one by one, to shake my hand. A colonel from Army Family Readiness said, "You did something I've never seen an officer do. You gave permission for others to speak." Later, outside the hall, Leah caught up with me holding her phone. Guess what she said? The seminar's live stream already hit 20,000 views. They're calling it the Ward Directive. I laughed softly. I just wrote a memo. You wrote a lifeline, she said. That night, I returned to my temporary quarters at Belvoir and sat at the small desk overlooking the parade ground. The air smelled faintly of rain. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single line across the top page, Lesson 17. Sometimes the mission isn't to fight, it's to illuminate. Below it, I added, Status objective achieved. I turned off the lamp, sat back, and let the sound of the night training drills fade into the distance. The same discipline that once chained me had become the foundation of something freer. They'd taken my voice once. I had turned it into a policy. Somewhere, maybe another soldier would hear my words and decide that their pain wasn't disloyalty. It was information that deserved a report. That thought was enough. I folded the seminar badge in half, tucked it into my folder, and whispered the same phrase Major Collins had written to me, clarity over control. The Army had taught me that orders define behavior. Life had taught me that boundaries define freedom. Now both served the same mission. The move to Raleigh felt like the last page of a long, scorched chapter. My new apartment wasn't grand, just a one-bedroom on the 5th floor of a renovated brick building near downtown, close enough to see the skyline, but far enough to hear myself think. The air smelled faintly of coffee and asphalt from the street below, mixed with the hum of early autumn rain. For the first time in years, every box I unpacked belonged only to me. No footsteps down the hall, no doors slamming, no voices telling me who I should be. Just silence, the good kind, the kind that didn't hurt. The movers left by noon, and I spent the afternoon arranging the few things that mattered: my desk, a small bookshelf, the single-framed photo I kept from my 20s graduation Army intelligence school. I hung it on the wall above my desk. In the photo, I was smiling, squinting against the Georgia sun, holding my diploma like it was a passport out of chaos. I hadn't realized until now how right I'd been. The sunlight streamed through the tall window, warm and golden, falling across my uniform, hanging neatly on the door. The captain insignia caught the light gleaming faintly, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at it, realizing how much that small piece of metal had come to mean. They broke my arm. They tried to break my name, but they hadn't broken my command. I had taken it back, inch by inch, choice by choice. The echo of that thought followed me as I brewed coffee and watched the rain start again outside. The city pulsed quietly below people rushing to evening shifts. Headlights reflecting off wet streets, a violin playing somewhere from a nearby balcony. Raleigh was alive in ways Fayetteville never was. It felt anonymous, forgiving, like I could start over without the ghosts recognizing my face. I opened my laptop and checked my inbox routine messages, an update from the ethics office, confirming that family abuse awareness for soldiers was now part of the mandatory annual training cycle, and a note from Major Collins Ward, saw your seminar. Proud of you. Keep going. Short, precise, perfect. I smiled, reading it twice before closing the screen. My cast had been gone for weeks, but I still rubbed the scar, sometimes tracing the ridge that ran like a small lightning bolt under my skin. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. It was proof that pain could become architecture. Later that evening, I walked out onto the small balcony. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining like mirrors. Across the way, the windows of another building glowed in soft yellow squares. Life went on, people laughing, cooking, living without knowing my story. And I preferred it that way. Not as the officer who survived, but just Elise, the woman who made it out. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the wet air, and thought about what freedom actually felt like. It wasn't loud or cinematic. It didn't come with applause or forgiveness. It came in the quiet when no one else's voice decided your next move. When I turned back inside, I noticed the stack of papers on my counter, the lease agreement, my transfer orders, and a single sticky note Leah had left when she helped me move. Freedom isn't distance, it's peace. I smiled, stuck it next to my graduation photo, and whispered, "You're right." That night, I unpacked the last box books, mostly a few keepsakes from deployments, and one item I'd almost forgotten, my old Army notebook from my first year in service. The cover was worn, the corners frayed, but inside were lessons scribbled during training lines, like observe, analyze, adapt. I added a new one on the final page, recover. The lamp cast a soft amber light across the desk as I sat and wrote my after-action note, a habit I'd never broken. Situation resolved. Objective achieved. Status at peace. I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and exhaled. Outside, thunder murmured over the city, gentle and far away, like an echo from a war that no longer existed. Before bed, I opened the window wider and let the night air roll in. The lights of Raleigh stretched toward the horizon, the same horizon I'd stared at from base barracks, from hospital windows, from a courtroom bench. The difference now was that the horizon finally belonged to me. I thought of all the versions of myself that had existed, the one who stayed silent, the one who obeyed out of fear, the one who left bleeding but determined, and I wanted to tell her that every scar had been a compass pointing here. To this apartment, to this peace. My phone buzzed once, a notification from the Army social feed. Someone had reposted the clip of my promotion ceremony with a new caption. Discipline isn't obedience, it's self-respect. Thousands of likes. I smiled faintly. The world could keep its viral moments. What mattered now was the quiet kind of legacy, the one written in lives that would be a little freer because mine had been visible. I turned off the phone, left it face down on the table, and whispered to the room. They took my arm. I took my life back. The words didn't sound bitter anymore. They sounded earned. When I woke the next morning, sunlight flooded the apartment, spilling across the hardwood floor, glinting off the captain's insignia on my desk. The city stirred awake, outside buses, hissing coffee shops, opening, a dog barking somewhere below. I poured another cup of coffee, opened my journal, and wrote the first line of my next chapter. Freedom requires maintenance. I didn't know where life would take me next, another post, another assignment, maybe even another war. But I knew I'd never go back to that house or to that version of myself that thought silence was safety. I had served my country with discipline. Now I was learning to serve myself with the same. I looked out the window, the morning light painting the skyline gold, and for the first time I said it aloud, not as a vow but as a fact. I'm free. Then, as always, I left one line open at the bottom of the page, my call to whoever would find strength in these words. Have you ever fought to be free from control? Drop your city below. I read them all. 1 year later, the world felt quieter. The noise that once filled my days, lawyers' reports, investigations, had faded into background static, replaced by the rhythm of normal life. It was May again. Fort Liberty's sky, the same hard Carolina blue it had been the morning everything began. I drove down from Raleigh with the windows cracked open, the scent of honeysuckle and jet fuel mingling in the air, a strange blend of home and duty. Leah was already waiting at the memorial grounds when I arrived. Her dress uniform pressed, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. The bronze plaques of the Hall of Honor shimmered under the sunlight. Every name carved there belonged to someone who had given their life in service, some in combat, some in ways less visible. We stood there for a long while, watching the wreath-laying ceremony. The choir sang low, the bugle echoed across the field, and for the first time I didn't flinch at the sound. It felt right. It felt earned. Leah broke the silence first. You ever think you'd come back here and actually feel peace? I smiled faintly. Not like this. Not after everything. You look different, she said, studying me. Calmer. That's what distance does, I said. It cleans the static out of your head. She nodded slowly. Still haven't talked to your mom. I shook my head. Not once. I think she tried calling the ethics office after the report went public, said she wanted to make amends. I didn't return the message. Leah's eyes softened. That's okay, she said. Some wars end with distance. I glanced toward the names on the wall, and some with silence. She gave a small smile. You think she'll ever understand? Maybe, I said. But understanding doesn't undo anything. The sun climbed higher, and the names on the bronze gleamed brighter. People around us bowed their heads, whispered prayers. I found myself tracing the edge of one plaque with my finger, feeling the indent of a last name I didn't know. The grooves felt like the scars on my own arm, permanent reminders of service and consequence. Leah slipped her hands behind her back posture straight, her voice low. You know your speech at Fort Belvoir went all the way up to the Pentagon. They're talking about expanding your module to every base. I looked at her surprised. You're kidding. No, she said. They're calling it the Ward Initiative. Quietly, of course. Bureaucracy hates giving credit where it's due. I laughed softly. Figures. You should be proud, she said. You didn't just survive. You changed the rules for the next person. I thought about that for a long moment. The Army had trained me to think in objectives and outcomes. This one was harder to measure. I had wanted justice, but what I found was something deeper legacy. The kind that didn't need applause. You ever miss the noise? Leah asked. The adrenaline. The fight. I looked out across the field where the flags fluttered in neat rows. Sometimes I said, but peace takes practice. It's like learning how to breathe again after holding your breath for years. She chuckled. You make it sound poetic. Maybe I said smiling, but I earned the right to sound poetic. The ceremony ended and people began to drift away, their conversations soft and reverent. I stayed behind, staring at the reflection of my uniform in the polished bronze. The sunlight caught my captain's insignia, scattering it across the metal like a second engraving. You know, I said quietly, I used to think promotion was the end game. Rank meant safety, respect, control. Turns out it was just the start of a different kind of command. Leah tilted her head. What kind self-command? I said. Learning where to draw the line between duty and damage. She nodded. That's the hardest kind to master. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of distant marching drums. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded paper, my original seminar note from Fort Belvoir. On the back, in my handwriting, were the words I'd written that night. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to serve the wrong command. Leah caught sight of it and smiled, still carrying that around. Always, I said, reminds me that peace isn't passive, it's earned. She looked at me for a long time. You know, when I first saw you in that hospital bed a year ago, I thought you'd never recover. I was wrong. I didn't recover, I said softly. I rebuilt. We walked slowly down the path toward the exit, passing a new section of plaques still being installed. The last one on the far end bore my name not as a casualty, but as an honoree under a new category the ethics office had created, Distinguished Service in Integrity and Reform. Seeing it there stopped me cold. Leah glanced over, reading it aloud. Captain Elise Ward, for demonstrating exceptional leadership in advancing ethical awareness and resilience within the United States Army. My throat tightened. I didn't know they were adding that. Major Collins told me, Leah said. He wanted it to be a surprise. I stood there for a long moment, the breeze lifting my hair, sunlight glinting off the inscription. A year ago, I'd stood in a hospital room wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Now my name stood beside others who had fought their own invisible wars. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my entire life being told to stay small, stay silent, stay obedient. And here I was etched in metal for doing the opposite. Leah placed a hand on my shoulder. Feels different seeing it like that, doesn't it? Yeah, I said quietly. This time I earned peace the same way I earned my rank with discipline. She smiled. And that's why it'll last. We left the memorial grounds as the afternoon light began to fade. The base behind us shimmered under the heat, jets cutting through the sky in perfect formation. I looked once more at the bronze wall at my own reflection fading in the distance and felt the final weight lift from my chest. The war was over. The scars would stay, but they no longer defined me. They were just coordinates on the map that led here to peace, to purpose, to freedom. I turned to Leah as we reached the car. "He broke my arm," I said, voice steady, no anger left. But he didn't break my command. The story of Captain Elise Ward was never meant to be about one family or one fight. It was about the quiet wars so many people wage in their own homes, workplaces, or memories, the ones without medals or parades, the ones fought between loyalty and survival. When people hear the word soldier, they picture uniforms, salutes, deployments, and battles overseas. But the truth is, every soldier fights a different war, and not all of them happen under the sound of gunfire. Some happen in kitchens and boardrooms, in bedrooms behind closed doors, where control replaces compassion. Elise's war began long before the Army gave her rank or title. It started in a house that taught her discipline without love, obedience without safety. For years, she confused silence with peace, until she learned that silence only protects the wrong people. Her journey through pain exposure, justice, and reform became more than a personal victory. It became a mirror. How many of us stay loyal to the people or systems that hurt us because we were taught that endurance equals strength? How many of us wear invisible uniforms saluting to commands we never agreed to follow? Elise's promotion wasn't just a rise in rank. It was a symbol of reclamation. She took every insult, every bruise, every attempt to discredit her and turned them into fuel for something that outlasted the people who tried to break her. The Army trained her to operate with precision. Life trained her to survive with conscience. And when those two forces met discipline and truth, she rewrote the definition of courage. There's something powerful in watching someone who was told they'd never matter stand tall in a uniform that represents service integrity and resilience. She didn't just win against her stepfather. She proved that control collapses when it meets documentation, that fear dissolves when you expose it to the light, that love without accountability is manipulation. Somewhere, someone will see her story and recognize their own reflection. A daughter who still answers calls out of guilt. A mother who stays silent to keep the peace. A soldier who hides their home life because strength is supposed to look stoic. But Elise's truth didn't end in tragedy. It ended in transformation, the kind that turns trauma into blueprint pain, into policy silence, into education. When she wrote Family Abuse Awareness for Soldiers, she didn't just write a report. She wrote a map out of darkness, and that map now lives inside every training module that tells a young recruit if someone hurts you and calls it love, that's not loyalty, that's a wound demanding repair. Maybe that's what legacy really is, not the buildings or titles, but the shift in culture that outlives your story. Elise's courage became contagious. Her module turned into the Ward Initiative, a framework soldiers across bases started quoting, sharing, and applying to their own lives. When she spoke at the seminar, her words echoed through 1,000 rooms. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to serve the wrong command. That line found its way into posters, training slides, and even tattoos among those who needed the reminder. The audience felt rage at what she endured, respect for how she rose, and curiosity about how she never lost her composure. That combination, rage, respect, curiosity, is what keeps people watching until the last frame, because it's the emotional truth of survival. If you've ever lived under someone else's rules and finally learned to breathe without asking permission, you know what that feels like. This story was for every person who's ever had to choose between their peace and their past, for every woman told to just let it go, for every man told that asking for help means weakness, for every soldier who's fought a war no one could see. Elise's message isn't bound to her uniform, it's universal. That's why it resonates with viewers across ages and places. People in their 50s and 60s who raised families under the weight of silence watch her story and whisper, "That was me." Veterans watch and nod, remembering the orders they followed at home, not on the field. And younger viewers watch her stand before a courtroom and realize that boundaries aren't rebellion, they're the first act of self-respect. When the final scene fades, Elise at the memorial, sunlight reflecting off her captain's insignia, it's more than closure. It's a salute to everyone who learned that peace isn't given. It's built, guarded, and earned. And now it's your turn to stand in that reflection. Maybe your war isn't physical. Maybe it's emotional, financial, generational. Maybe it's just learning to say no when everyone expects you to say yes. Whatever battle you've been fighting, remember this discipline isn't about control. It's about clarity. The same clarity that led Elise out of a house built on fear and into a life built on truth. You don't need rank to reclaim your power. You just need one decision to stop serving the wrong command. So now to everyone watching, where are you from and what war have you fought? Tell me your city, your story, your moment of clarity. Because somewhere out there, another person is reading your comment, realizing they're not alone. Every soldier fights a different war. Tell me where you're watching from and who you fight for. The truth is not everyone gets a courtroom or a promotion ceremony to mark their victory. Some wars end quietly. Sometimes you don't get an apology, a letter, or a final conversation. Sometimes closure looks like a room where no one raises their voice anymore. And that's enough. That's the message I wanted this story to carry, that freedom doesn't always arrive wrapped in triumph. Sometimes it just slips in when you finally stop trying to earn love from people who weaponize it. Elise's story struck so many nerves because it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She didn't burn the house down. She exposed what lived inside it. She didn't destroy her stepfather. She simply stepped out of his narrative. For anyone watching who's lived under the weight of someone else's expectations, whether that's a parent, partner, or system, you know how heavy that silence feels. The kind that convinces you that survival equals submission. But it doesn't. Survival is the art of staying human in places that try to strip that from you. Elise never sought pity, and neither should you. The army taught her discipline, but life taught her that obedience without choice is just captivity. And that's the part older viewers connect with most because they've lived long enough to understand that not all wars are fought with weapons and not all wounds bleed on the surface. Some heal only when you finally say no more. For the 50-year-old mother who raised kids while enduring someone else's anger. For the veteran who came home and found the battlefield still waiting inside their own house. For the father who stayed silent because society said men don't speak about fear. This story belongs to you too. We tell these stories because they remind us that pain isn't weakness. It's data. It's the record of what we've survived and what we refuse to repeat. When Elise stood in that courtroom and said, "Justice isn't revenge," it's correction. She wasn't talking to the judge. She was talking to every person who ever confused forgiveness with surrender. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission. And she refused to give that anymore. That's why her story resonates beyond the military. It's not about uniformed courage, it's about the courage to walk away from commands that no longer serve your integrity. It's about women who were told to stay quiet for the sake of family men told to be strong, while breaking inside children who grew up thinking survival was gratitude. Elise's war ended in a courtroom, but yours might end in a kitchen, a hospital, or a late-night phone call where you finally hang up instead of apologizing. The location doesn't matter. What matters is the decision. That's the same clarity she found when she told her mother, "You called it family when I was bleeding. Now it's just convenient." There's a strange beauty in that moment, a sentence that's equal parts grief and liberation, because letting go isn't cruelty, it's closure. Her story reminds us that justice isn't loud, it's paperwork patience policy, it's healing without spectacle. And it's what happens when you stop chasing people who only notice you when you're hurting. The Ward Initiative. Her ethics program is now part of military training because she understood something vital. You don't dismantle a culture of silence with rage. You dismantle it with structure. She turned her trauma into regulation. She made sure the next generation of soldiers would have resources she never did. That's how legacy works, not with fireworks, but with footnotes. With memos that outlast gossip, with lessons disguised as forms and checkboxes. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And for a soldier, real is sacred. That's why her story hit so hard for audiences in their 50s and 60s, people who've spent decades cleaning up after other people's damage. because they see in her not just a soldier but a survivor who refused to let her pain become her language. She spoke in facts and truth, in calm precision, and that's what made it powerful. You don't need rage to reclaim your life. You just need consistency. You just need to mean what you say and document what they deny. Elise didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she stayed measured while the people around her unraveled. That's what discipline looks like, not suppression, but strategy. And that's what made her story worth remembering. So as you sit here watching, maybe you're thinking about your own Fort Liberty. Maybe it's not a military base, but a place you return to out of habit. A house, a relationship, a role you've outgrown. Ask yourself, what command are you still serving that doesn't deserve your loyalty? Who benefits from your silence? And what would happen if you finally walked away? You don't need an audience. You don't need a medal. You just need one quiet moment of courage, because courage doesn't roar. It doesn't demand permission. It whispers enough. And that whisper is where freedom begins. So here's my question to you, the one that closes every story but opens the next chapter. Where are you watching from, and who do you fight for? I read every answer. Not as data, but as testimony. Because these stories don't belong to Elise alone. They belong to everyone who's ever had to choose between fear and freedom. Drop your city, your story, your war below. Someone out there needs to know they're not fighting alone. Maybe the reason Elise's story lingers is because it reminds us that strength doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in a quiet apartment, realizing you don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. Sometimes it looks like letting people misunderstand you because peace is more valuable than being right. And sometimes it's learning that walking away isn't weakness, it's command. For a long time, Elise believed that her worth depended on how much she could endure. That's what her stepfather taught her, what her mother reinforced, and what the world seemed to reward compliance dressed as grace. But the truth she discovered was much simpler. Endurance without boundaries isn't resilience. It's erosion. That's what makes her story resonate across generations, especially for those watching from small towns, cities, or quiet suburbs where reputation still outweighs truth. People see themselves in her, the parent who stayed for the children, the veteran who learned to compartmentalize pain until it disappeared, the woman who kept forgiving because she thought forgiveness was synonymous with love. Elise's story dismantles that illusion. Forgiveness without distance is captivity. Love without respect is control. And silence in the name of peace is complicity. Yet she never preached those truths. She embodied them. Every time she stood her ground with her stepfather, with the court, with her own doubts, she showed that discipline isn't submission, it's sovereignty. She didn't just protect her rank. She redefined what it meant to command. In doing so, she became something larger than her story. She became a reminder that leadership begins when self-respect finally outweighs fear. And maybe that's why people write to this channel every day sharing their own versions of her fight. We read comments from Oklahoma, New York, Manchester, Johannesburg from people who've lived through their own invisible wars. A grandmother who wrote, "He broke my trust, not my voice." A young soldier who said, "I'm still serving, but now I serve myself too." A man in his 60s who said, "Your stories taught me boundaries are protection, not punishment." Those comments are the heartbeat of this channel, the proof that storytelling can be armor. Because that's what stories like Elise's do. They turn pain into language that other people can use to navigate their own battles. They build bridges between strangers who will never meet but understand each other instantly. The truth is, we don't tell these stories for views or virality. We tell them because sometimes a stranger's voice is the only thing that reminds you you're not crazy. Sometimes hearing me too is the loudest kind of validation. So if you're watching right now, if this story made you clench your jaw or wipe your eyes, maybe it's because some part of you still recognizes the battlefield inside yourself. Maybe it's because you've been carrying the weight of endurance, mistaking it for purpose. Maybe it's because you've been told to just get over it when deep down you know you're still rebuilding from something that tried to silence you. Let Elise's story be your permission slip to rest, to speak, to walk away, or to start again. You don't need to be a soldier to fight a war. You just need to believe that your life is worth defending. And maybe that's what this entire series is about. Not revenge, not punishment, but justice that starts from within. Justice that says, I don't owe my pain to the people who caused it. I owe it to myself to transform it. That's the heartbeat of this space. The reason we ask you to comment, to share, to write where you're watching from. Because each story becomes part of a larger mission, showing that healing isn't isolation, it's connection. Every time you drop your city below Boston, Houston, Nairobi, Melbourne, you remind someone halfway across the world that they're not alone in the fight to reclaim their life. Elise earned her peace through discipline, not luck. You can too. It starts with clarity. The moment you decide that your voice, your freedom, and your truth are non-negotiable, you step into command of your own story. You stop being the casualty and become the author. And when enough of us start telling the truth, systems change, families shift, silence breaks. So, wherever you're watching from, whether it's a small kitchen in Ohio, a dorm room in California, or a quiet apartment on the other side of the world, know this: your survival is already your victory. You don't need to prove your pain to anyone. You just need to remember that endurance was never the goal. Peace was. Elise found hers standing beneath a flag that once symbolized duty. Now it symbolizes choice. She saluted not to authority, but to autonomy, to the soldier, the survivor, and the woman she became. And maybe that's what this final line means when she says, "He broke my arm, but he didn't break my command." Because no matter what someone took from you, time, trust, youth, or peace, they didn't take your ability to rebuild. That's still yours. That's still command. So tell me, where are you watching from and who do you fight for? I read every one of your stories. Every city, every name, every small declaration of freedom becomes part of this shared mission. Because every soldier fights a different war, but the victory always begins the same way, by choosing yourself.